Police in Germany have reportedly arrested the person suspected of Friday's stabbing rampage in Western Germany. The suspect in custody is a 26-year-old man who admitted to the crime. German authorities revealed all that earlier this morning, and I'm sure there's more to come.
The Islamic State's terror group has claimed responsibility for the attack, which they claimed was revenge for Muslims in Palestine and everywhere.
Beggars belief, doesn't it? Defence editor for the Evening Standard, Robert Fox, joins us now. Good morning, Robert.
Good morning.
It does make you absolutely throw your hands up in exasperation. Here we go again. And isn't it interesting that apparently Islamic State have claimed responsibility so quickly?
Yes, that's the angle, of course, which will be investigated, and it's part of the mystery because obviously there's been a lot of cyber activity, and there must be a real fear that this is the beginning of something, a new wave, because we're becoming into a new cycle of politics. There are three quite important regional elections coming up in Germany, in which the AfD right have made a strong stance of being deeply concerned about immigrations and migrant populations. It's a particularly sensitive area in Solingen, close to the Dutch border. There have been troubles there before. And at the moment, the German authorities, particularly the provincial authority of North Rhine-Westphalia, have been very careful about how they've labelled this. But they have been quite emphatic in that they have say that they have got the prime suspect. Now, who was behind him?
What's interesting about the initial early operation, Robert, is that the police were very slow to release any details of the attacker's description, despite the fact he was still at that point on the loose. And there's a lot of criticism around so-called cultural sensitivities in case it stoked up tensions. The fact of the matter is, these knife attacks are becoming alarmingly common in Germany. There have been several in this past year alone. A police officer was also recently killed. And it does seem to show that there is a growing issue with domestic terrorism, Islamic terrorism within Germany and indeed elsewhere. Synagogue was also firebombed in France last night.
Yeah, can we talk this one back? I think that the caution in announcing who they were looking for and why is that they arrested quite quickly a 15-year-old boy who had been seen talking to the suspect. I infer from that very clearly that they knew who they wanted, and they wanted to get him. And according to the report from, as you say, the Minister of the Interior for North Rhine-Westphalia, Mr. Herbert Ruhl, he said that the suspect was in very bloodied clothes still as he was arrested. What is worrying, as you say, is this is straight out of the old IS playbook, sorry, Islamic State playbook. Is this a lone wolf? Take your opportunity where it is. That's why the Dutch border police were alerted right away. They're a very powerful police force, the Maréchaux say, very big anti-terror background. And as you say, that this is an alert. Are we coming in for a new wave of Islamic terrorism? Because this has been feared. I think that without scaring the horses too much, I mean, this has to be said now, that this has been feared, that it might be one of the playouts from the terrible problems that are going on in Gaza, the West Bank, and in Israel and in the Middle East. Yes, it may be local, but what it is symptom of, as you say, Martin, may be very serious. And I think everybody is on an alert. I am absolutely sure that our Interior Ministry's equivalent, because it's not just the Home Office, will be saying something about this in the week.
And that will make it very interesting now that they've got the suspect. When they look at his phone or his laptop or whatever, because was there any coordination to this? In other words, could it happen again? And are there others who are going to do the same thing?
And that's absolutely the point, because I've mentioned this thing, is this a lone wolf, so-called, which was the great fear, people who had no form appearing, although they seem to have gone to the refugee home only 300 meters away from where the celebratory fair was being held. The problem in the past, if you think back to what happened in the south of France when a truck drove into Bastille Day celebrants, terrible thing. That was supposed to be a lone wolf at the Christmas fairs in Germany. The trouble is that the lone wolves, as you imply, often don't turn out to be so lone. There is always a network. Where did the ideas come from? And the fact that the way that this man, rather gruesomely, went about the attack indicates that he knew what he was doing.
And just quickly, it came to light, the statement there, that this was an attack targeted specifically on Christians. This was a diversity festival to mark the 650th anniversary of Solingen. So it was a deliberate, it appears, from Islamic State statement, a targeted attack on Christians on behalf of Muslims and Palestinians. Robert, that suggests something quite sinister, a kind of emerging religious conflict, perhaps.
It goes back to the origins of IS, and I was looking this up only yesterday because of this coming up, and it was a rogue individual, you may remember, who was tracked down largely with British intelligence help in Iraq, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. You're absolutely right. And this is where IS, slightly different and was more vehement even than Al-Qaeda of bin Laden, in that it targeted Christians. And interestingly, it targets Shia, who are seen as heretics as bad as Christians by some elements of IS. By the way, the thing has been made much more complicated in that IS seems to be quite fragmented at the moment, active in different parts of the area, and we've got of the Middle East and Central Asia, because we've got the IS element from coming out of Afghanistan again, IS Khorasan, which has been active in the region and against Shiites in Iran. Would you believe it? Yes, there is a problem. There is a problem with this kind of extreme activity in the name of Islam. Of course, mainstream theologians, particularly Sunni theologians, will say this has got nothing to do with Islam per se as a religion.
OK, Robert Fox, thank you for your expert analysis, as ever, on this concerning story. Thank you. And there are patterns here. The Islamic State claiming responsibility for this tragic knife attack, this time, Tom, in Germany. Tell us more.
Absolutely. So, as you've already been talking about on the show this morning, 3 dead, 8 injured, 5 in critical condition after this stabbing spree at a festival in the city of Solingen. It was their kind of celebration of the founding of the city. There was this huge manhunt which was going on over the course of yesterday. As of a few hours ago, they have found who they believe to be the suspects, as well as there being a string of other arrests. Seemingly, other people knew that this was going to take place. As you've already been talking about, the Islamic State have taken responsibility, referred to this as one of their soldiers, framed it very much as an attack on Christians, which I thought was interesting, and also framing it very much as we've talked about, revenge for Palestinians and Muslims the world over and so on. In a grim way, this was something that was probably coming, particularly in Germany. There's been a lot of foiled attacks in recent months. I mean, back during the Euros, ahead of, I think it was the England-Spain game, there was an ISIS-linked or ISIS-suspected plot which was foiled way back in December in the wake of October the 7th. There was a Hamas-linked plot which was foiled in Germany as well, which boggles the mind as to why there wasn't actually a higher kind of terror threat level. Apparently there wasn't even the kinds of security measures in place one might expect for an event of this size. But it's just a reminder that we have this tremendous complacency where Islamist extremism is concerned. We have almost begun to think about it as something that flares up time and again like bad weather.
Why do we have?
Without actually focusing on it.
Why do we have a complacency about it?
I think because there's a combination of things, one of which is that it's an incredibly difficult problem to solve. You're talking about individuals who might be radicalised via online networks. It's not like there's a kind of group of people moving through a continent that you can easily foil. Therefore, the more difficult a problem is to solve, the less politicians want to talk about it. The other thing is that they are afraid of talking about this particular issue. There is a tremendous sensitivity, bred, I think, of a actually quite despicable prejudice that if you talk about Islamist extremism, you will somehow alienate the law-abiding British Muslim majority or European Muslim majority. But the complacency is tremendous. I mean, we had a basically Hamas-inspired terror attack in this country back in October, or November rather, in Hartlepool, where one gentleman stabbed and a couple of people and then actually killed a gentleman on the street, inspired by Hamas, effectively. And everyone's forgotten about that entirely. Even though it was quite small scale, it was still something which reminds you that these extremist elements are very much there, very much posing a threat, and yet we still kind of stutter to talk about it for longer than 5 minutes.
That's true, Emma, that, as you say, I do, I think, is that we have a complacency about it because our politicians realise they can't do much about it without offending all sorts of people, and therefore they don't talk about it, and we don't talk about it.
I think it's probably a bit less about the offence thing. I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but I'm sure that it does. I think it's more that politicians, the immediate question that you would ask them, quite rightly, because it's your job as journalists, is what are you going to do about it? And you can talk about the problem, but the what are you going to do about it is a really hard question because...
For example, we've seen everyone that's called far right in Britain scooped up and jailed.
Well, no, we haven't. We've seen some people who've been called far right scooped up and jailed.
How about a similar crackdown on Islamist terrorists across Germany, across France, across Britain?
Again,
you'd be accused of being Islamophobic.
I come back to what Tom was saying about the fact that these are very disparate networks. We used to think of the lone wolf or the terrorist gang. And actually, this is something that fits in a really grey area in the middle. So it is incredibly complex. If you...
Is it, though?
Yes, and this is the problem.
They're driven by a dogma of Islamist extremism. And
absolutely.
They hate Christians.
But not everybody...
What's complicated about that?
Not everybody who believes in Islamist extremism is then going to go on and commit a crime. So the problem, again, and it comes back to this tension that we've been talking about on all sorts of issues, between how do you police belief and how do you police action as a result of that belief. And when does the line get crossed and how do you cross it and how do you find out how... And there are people being radicalised on all sorts of issues, on all sorts of areas, and one of them, and I'm very happy to say it, is Islamic extremism. And when they're being radicalised, there will be 100 people being radicalised. If one of them decides to go out and behave like this, they have committed a crime. The other 99 have just held radical beliefs. How do we police it? That's where it's complicated.
What shocks me, though, and this is more about Britain, which I know a bit more about, is the number of times you do see one of these attacks and the fact that they are known to the authorities floats up quite quickly. Now, a lot of attacks have been foiled that we don't ever get to hear about, so one shouldn't cast too much aspersions on the security services or the counter-terror police. But at the same time, the oversights that we saw with something like the Manchester Arena attacker, where he was able to kind of go back and forth between Libya, where he was learning how to build bombs. He was on MI5's radar. They were given information in the run-up to the attack, but decided it wasn't significant enough to intervene. You do see stories like this time and again. And it's not just, he's been flagged up because he's been on a few websites. He's actually been travelling to a war zone to train with Islamists and suddenly is allowed to go back and forth.
Absolutely, and that feels to me like there was a serious gap there. If we are knowing about people travelling to Libya, quite clearly going to training, because Libya is basically the training camp of the world, isn't it? There must be ways of dealing with that.
We have to leave it there, fellas. Superb stuff.